ConnectYard, make your applications more social and engaging with ConnectYard's RESTful Web API webinar. First I would like to thank everybody for joining. On our end, we have myself as Christopher Corelli. I am an account executive here at ConnectYard. We also have Matt Devine, and he is our senior product development. All right, so what we're first going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and he's going to start us off with the webinar. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. And if there's any questions throughout the webinar, you can please post them in the chat and question box, and we'll get to them at the end. All right.
All right. Thanks, Chris. So what we're going to go over today is basically talk about ConnectYard's new RESTful API, go over kind of how you can use it, some basic things for setting it up, and then when we get all said and done, we're actually going to show a little example of kind of how you can use it. So there we go. So the first slide is just for those of you who aren't familiar with ConnectYard, but they're just kind of interested in the API. As we say right here, ConnectYard offers a completely private and secure social engagement platform that enables organizations to instantly reach users wherever they are and any way they'd like. So basically with ConnectYard, you're allowing users to communicate with one another on their channels of choice. So if they want to opt to get messages on their phone via text message or via Twitter, Facebook, regular email, or even LinkedIn, they can actually opt to do that with ConnectYard. From here, what I'm actually going to do to kind of start things off, just to get a feel for things, I'm actually going to ask a polling question. So this polling question is going to be, how does your application primarily generate notifications to users now? So you guys should see that, so if everybody could go ahead and just answer that, that would be great. I'll leave this up just for a few seconds, and then we'll pull this down. Okay, so let me close that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share that. So right now, from what we got here, everybody seems to be using email. Email is kind of the common way to go about doing it. And what you'll see is as we go through this webinar, you could actually use the API to enhance that. So let's hide that. And moving right along. So let's skip one of my slides. Where'd my slide go? All right, well, we'll find it. So the next slide is going to actually be, what is the ConnectYard API? So, what an API is basically a means of accessing a system and its components through a defined set of interfaces. So for the ConnectYard API, as we'll kind of get into, it's an HTTP-based API you'll be able to use to actually access ConnectYard's components. I'll actually go into, in just a minute, what some of those components are, just so you can kind of understand as we're going through this, when I'm talking about certain things, you can have a basic idea of what those definitions are. So some of the web services that we actually allow you to do is creating users, creating yards. A yard is synonymous with a group, posting and replying to messages, and also viewing message and wall timelines. So you can kind of see all the messages that are coming through. You're going to be able to actually pull those out of ConnectYard and display them in your own interface. Another thing just to note with the API is all the endpoints are operated on behalf of a specific user. So when you're actually accessing them, you're accessing them as that one particular user, so you have the rights and the privileges of that user. So this way, if a user is not allowed to access a particular question, or they're not allowed to access a particular group of questions when they're looking at them, they would actually be able to see those. You would actually get a message telling you that you don't have permission or you're not allowed to do that. So moving over to the ConnectYard component screen, we have a few things that I'm just going to go ahead and define for you. Basically, these are kind of the core components when interacting with ConnectYard. So first and foremost, everything comes from the community. Community is kind of where all your users are going to reside within a community. And in that community, there's going to be yards. So there's kind of a community administrator. They kind of overwatch over everything that happens inside of the community. Now, a yard as I mentioned, is something that's synonymous with a group. So you can create this for common interests, groups within an organization, classes, and allow users to then enroll into this group. And what they're going to be able to do from there is message one another privately. So everybody in that group will be able to communicate with each other in the group, but people outside of the group won't actually be able to see those messages. Now, the second component there is, or third in the list, is wall. So while Yard allows group communications, wall communications are one-to-one. So basically it allows you to have private conversations with another user, so you can actually go one-to-one with them and communicate. Now, with all these messages, as we'll see in a few minutes, they all integrate with all the different channels of communication ConnectYard allows. Now, underneath that is likes, follows, and views, and these are kind of the some of the core tracking metrics that we keep track of inside of ConnectYard. So you're able to like messages, which is a different way, as anybody that's familiar with Facebook, of actually recognizing a response to a message without actually having to physically enter in that you like their response. Following allows you to jump into a conversation and start receiving the notifications on it. Once again, without having to physically participate, you can just kind of subscribe to it and be able to receive those notifications. And then views are actually a really popular feature because they let you be able to track who has actually looked at the message. So this is, think of it as a read receipt for email, but on steroids. Because not only is it going to be, allow you to see when a user is viewing it, it's going to allow everybody to see when the users have viewed the message if you so choose, as well as being able to see when they viewed it on Facebook or through the portal or through your application that you create. And then the timelines, this is just where you can get all the messages. So we have a couple of timelines that you can access. There's the message timeline, so any top-level posts fall under this bucket. Replies, there's a timeline for those, so you can see in chronological order where the replies, as the replies come in, and then there's also a timeline for the wall. So you can see all the messages that people have sent to you over the past time. Now, from here, we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about some usage scenarios for the API. The first one I have here is branding. So just to get an idea on what the branding is for, we're actually going to see that when I go through the example a little bit later when we actually go through a physical example. We have a sample ConnectYard application that's actually going to let us interact with the system. And basically, one of the big proponents there is being able to self-brand it. So you can actually put ConnectYard into your portals, into your applications, and be able to actually brand it how you like. The other one we have here is adding additional channels. So with the API, you'd be able to actually add these additional channels here and be able to allow messages to go to these users across these different channels without actually building up the full interface. One second. Okay. It's getting a little bit of feedback there, so I just had to mute a microphone. So from here, what I'm actually going to do is actually going to ask another polling question. And this one is kind of similar to the one that we just did, except it's now asking what types of notifications would you like to actually add into your applications. So if everybody could just go ahead and give some feedback there, that'd be great. Right. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and we'll share those results here. As we can see, it's pretty interesting. We got a good dispersal here. Most people are actually interested in attacking the social media aspect, with some on text and then others on email. And one of the nice things about obviously the API is you'd be able to actually hook into all of these through ConnectYard. Okay. So next I want to go over just in general how ConnectYard actually works, channels and notifications. So that's kind of the core of one of the things that we're doing, is allowing these messages to reach users across their channels. But it's not as simple as we're just blanketing and sending messages to them on everything that they have set up for all the time. We actually let the users decide. So if we start on a little example, we got me here, looking like I'm out of the 1920s, getting ready to send a message. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to send a message via email to my yard in ConnectYard. And what's going to happen is it's going to get received by ConnectYard, and it's actually going to get posted into that yard. Now, what happens after it gets posted is it actually looks at the user settings in the yard and sees, okay, who's in the yard, how do they want to receive notifications for this message, and then it's going to route those messages to those users on those channels. So right here we can see that we have Mike, Grant, and Don, and they all have different channels set up for their yards. So right here we can see that Mike's actually going to get it on all of his channels except for text, while Grant's going to get it in LinkedIn, text, and email, and Don, he just went for the full boat, and he said, give me everything. But we allow the users to actually configure that and customize it. So certain notifications or certain groups or yards that users deem more important, they can decide to turn more communications on, but others, they can just opt for Facebook and email, for example, which is what I have set up for this particular case. And it works for replies as well. So all of these people are going to receive it on these channels, and then they can go back and actually reply to it. For example, if Grant did via text, it would come back into ConnectYard, and it would actually go to me on email and Facebook. So I'd be able to get those responses as well, allowing me to have a conversation and a dialogue around this, this information. Now, moving on from here, we're going to get a little bit more API-centric. So some of the basics with the API here, it's a REST-based API. Basically, it's an HTTP API, meaning if you can make a web call in your application, you can basically use our API. So it's being that it's REST, it hinges on the basic HTTP methods. You have get, post, delete. Those are the ones that ConnectYard actually uses, and the fact is that we also, the endpoints can be used for multiple purposes. So doing a get, while saying, hey, get me this particular message, will get that message for you. If you were to do a delete on that particular one, it would actually remove that message if you have permissions. So all these permissions and stuff, they can all be set up through the API as well. You have all that kind of control over being able to actually configure and set up your yards. Now the next one is authentication. So the initial authentication for the API is based on OAuth. OAuth is probably one of the most popular forms of authentication for an API. You look at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google. Everybody's using it as a secure way of actually authenticating and validating the consumers of an API. Now, there's lots of information out there because of this, lots of available libraries. So while OAuth can be cumbersome on the low end, all these libraries are basically there to help you abstract all that heavy lifting. And you'll see when we actually get to the code side of things how easy it is when you have a library to actually make an OAuth call, because that library will do all that hard work for you of getting everything in the right spot and set up correctly, so we can actually validate the user. Now, one of the things that we do with the API is because with OAuth, I keep saying that, is we actually allow you, because you are the trusted consumer of the API, we allow you to basically have a access token that is global to your community. So you can actually come in with that, as we'll see, and basically select which user you actually want to make the calls on behalf of. Now, all the API endpoints, final point here, return data in a JSON format. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's kind of becoming the de facto, one of the de facto means of actually returning data. One of the primary reasons is it's a clean, concise format. It's not as verbose as something like XML. And also, if you're accessing this data from a web page, for our particular example, we are with using JavaScript. It is inherently, being that the name is JavaScript Object Notation, very easy to use with JavaScript. Kind of drops right in and allows you to access all the different data members that come back from the data that you're actually receiving. So for the actual example that we're going to go through, we have a couple of different windows that we're going to be in. First and foremost, we have the sample application that we built using the API. This is a PHP application for this particular example, and it basically does just some of the basic procedures that users actually do when they interact with the system. The next one is the developer console. This is where you can get a feel for how the calls actually interact with the system. So getting the documentation and actually seeing what the call looks like in there and seeing the block of what the response actually looks like, well, well and good. It's really useful to be able to actually physically make the calls in the system. So the developer console allows you to sit there. You basically authenticate your session, and then you're able to sit there and play around with the API just by filling out some fields. The final one is just ConnectYard.com, and the real reason we're going to have this up is to be able to show you that when I post something via the simple app or I perform an action via the developer console, you'll be able to see those reactions come back in the on ConnectYard.com. So we'll be able to see how this is all interacting. Now, next we have code. So sadly, an API, you need to code to actually get it to work. Although I wouldn't say sadly, I actually have fun doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through just some of the sample app, kind of how it was built up, what it looks like. The first thing we're going to kind of take a look at is OAuth. So we have a library here that does it. So I'm not really going to go too in-depth into that library because, as I mentioned before, it's doing all that hard work for us. It's just basically consuming the top-level methods and being able to actually access it from there. Now, we also have a little Java example as well, just to show it in another, in another format. And both of them are just used to extract the actual OAuth calls, and you'll be able to see just how easy it is to make those calls once once you get everything up and running. Next, we have a timeline and a report view. These two pages are basically our display pages. So while we're consuming the API, we still have to display it somewhere. So we have these two particular pages we'll look at and see how you can actually view the data and look at it. And then the final part here is we have an AJAX page. So basically, when we fire our call from the web page, it's actually going through an intermediary page. And this is basically to prevent cross-site scripting issues. So basically, we fire all our calls through here, and inside of that page is where all the OAuth is being done, and the actual call to the API is being done. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm actually going to exit out of the presentation, and we're going to just open up some code and just take a look at that. So the first file I have here, this is as I was mentioning, this is the library. So all these methods in here are all used to actually make the OAuth call happen, but you don't have to do anything in here. So from a PHP perspective, while this library here is doing all the work, I don't have to know what's going on here. I don't have to know exactly what's happening to make this work. All you need to do is actually implement it, and it'll be able to make all the calls for you. So if I were to take a look at the timeline example, right over here, this is the timeline page. And if you just want to see a quick glimpse at what that is, I actually have that over here. So this is what the timeline page actually looked like rendered in a browser. So coming back here, up at the top, we're requiring our OAuth library. We're defining some basic parameters here. Part of OAuth is having a consumer key and secret, and then an access token and secret to be able to access the information. So, and the consumer key and secret right here, and the access token and secret here, these will actually be given to you. So when you sign up for the API, we would actually supply these values to you, and then you would be able to basically drop them in, if you were using the PHP example, and be able to actually execute the call. And then what happens from there is after we define these two objects, which is basically just building it up so internally it can do all of its, all its magic, we build up our request where we're telling it, okay, here's the consumer, here's the token, and we tell it what kind of method we want to do. We're going to do a get, and then we give it our endpoint, which we have right here. So this is one of the API endpoints. Whoops. You can see what happens when you try to actually go to a URL when you haven't authenticated. It'll tell you that your consumer key is invalid. But basically, this is going to get the message timeline, the message home timeline for this particular user. And what happens from there is you build the request, you sign it, and then here we're just using curl to actually execute that request and get the JSON back. And then here's just another example down here that's doing the same thing. Now, I do have a Java example as well. This one, we actually have we're using a library, once again, that's abstracting it. We define our consumer information up here. Very basic. Once again, once you have the consumer key and the consumer secret, you just pop them right in here. We scroll down here. We get our access token, which these are the same values that I just looked at back over here in the OAuth examples. And once you do that, you just want to make the request. It's very similar to what's going on in the PHP. You build up your request by telling it what's the HTTP method, and then what's the call we're actually making. Now, right here, I actually have a post request where, right here we can see that I'm actually want to post something to a yard. The only thing I have here is I'm just saying that obviously we have to define a yard ID right here. And then from there, I would add because it's a post parameters don't actually get put into the query string, they get put into the post body. So here we're actually telling it we want to add this body parameter. And what's going to happen is you execute the request, and it would actually perform that. From the get perspective, we're basically overriding it, but we're saying we want to get the user info. Same thing, we supply our call, we give it the override so we can decide what user ID is actually making this call, and then sign it and execute the request. And then what's going to happen is it's going to come back with something like this down here. So this is just a sample JSON array that actually comes back. And when we go into the console, we'll actually be able to see what that actually looks like. Now, the yard report was another one that I had talked about as being a visual example. So this is another web page that's using the API to actually populate it with some data. So coming over here, this one is actually calling the AJAX page. This one doesn't have any of the OAuth work on it. It's basically just consuming the data that it needs and going from there. So here I just have some CSS to make it all nice and pretty. And then from there I'm actually just executing using jQuery in this particular case to execute a call. So when somebody clicks on the generate button, which we'll see in just a minute, it's going to get the yard ID that they select. It's going to make this call out to the AJAX page, and then when it comes back, it's going to populate all the fields. So shooting back over here, yard report is the actual page that I'm talking about. So we give it a yard ID, hit generate, that's when it's actually going to go out to the API. Now, all the magic for this is happening in this particular page. So on this page, very similar to what we were seeing on the timeline, and the reason we were seeing this information here on the timeline is because we're actually pulling that on the fly as soon as the page loads, while the yard report and some of the other pages are actually getting loaded on action. So right here, same thing. We load up the consumer object, the token object. We use our consumer key and secret, token key and secret. Once again, these are supplied to you. And then in this case, it's just saying, okay, well, what action do I want to do? And then it's going to build that up from here. So here's a get, particular get request, and it's basically abstracting our data. And right here, it's this access request to URL. The whole purpose of this is it'll actually return the URL with all the OAuth parameters baked into it. Most implementations of OAuth have something very similar, where you're not going to have to build the URL on your own. If you went to build the URL on your own, you have to make sure that you build it in the exact way that it meets the spec. So one of the things with the spec is, you have to alphabetize the parameters in a specific way and then get a signature for those by using a hashing function. So rather than having to worry about getting all those little idiosyncrasies correct, you just use the library, and it allows you to make that call a lot easier. So here it just throws it into the URL. We're telling it that we want it to a JSON array to go back. It's not a post. Executes the call. But we also have down here some delete, and we have a post as well from a PHP perspective. Delete is really the same as a get, except the only difference is we're just using the word delete here, and down here we're just telling curl that we want to do an actual HTTP delete. And then from a post perspective, very similar, where here we're getting the URL, and then down here we're actually, there's once again another method in the library that's going to get us that post data. So it's going to get the data for the post. It's going to have them all built up in the library or in the post body like it's supposed to, and just allow us to actually go ahead with that particular data. Now, from here, if we just, let me just click on down here instead of opening up the presentation again. What we're going to do now is actually go through an example. So we're going to use the API sample app. We're going to use the console, which we have right here, and then we have ConnectYard's sitting up here as well. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a quick sample of a post, and we're going to execute that from this example app. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cheat. Rather than typing out the message, I have it saved right here. We can copy that out. And what we're going to do is I have this little post box in here. I'll select which yard I actually want it to post to. In this case, I'll select first year experience, and I'll just hit post. And what that's going to do is that's now going to go up to ConnectYard. If I wanted to, I can reload this. I don't have it auto-loading, so we just have to manually reload it. You can see right here that the data shows up from the API call. If we wanted to, we can come back to ConnectYard, see that the message shows up here in ConnectYard as well. And then what's going to happen is we have some other people here that are actually going to be replying to this post from their own channels, and then we'll be able to interact with that from an API perspective. If I wanted to, I can come back over to the console, and here's where I was mentioning you can really mess around with the API here. So rather than just reading the documentation and then trying to implement it, you can actually play around with it and be able to say, okay, what are all the message actions I can do? So we have them basically blocked off by type. So if I just want to get the home timeline, which is the same timeline I'm looking at right here, I can expand that out. I can say, let's try it. And then it's going to come back. It's going to show me what was the actual call they made, what URL did it go to, what was the response that came back. It was a 200 OK. We have some response headers, and then it's got the response body, and you'll be able to see here all the messages that are actually coming back. So, we can see right here we're holding our first photo contest. I can actually see right down here that I already have a reply. If I shoot back over here, I got 2 replies now. So we're starting to get some replies in here. We can come back over to the API example app. We can refresh this in here. And we can see, here's an entry here. You can also see that Chris posted an image here. And what I can do with that is I can actually, let's grab this ID, and we can actually come back into ConnectYard and see that there's been some likes on the message. If I click on the particular message here, I can see that there's been some likes in some of these replies, and it looks like right now we got a tie. So what I'll do is I'll actually grab my message ID, because what I can do with that is I can actually say, let's not go to the message actions. Let's go back down to the reply actions. And let's give me the replies for this particular message. So I go ahead, I execute that. It's going to give me the replies for that message. Here's one from Mike that says, here's my entry. And we have the, let's go down a little bit further. Here's the post from Chris. Now, if I wanted to like this, well, I could do it in the website. What I'll do is I'll actually do it from here, from the API. So I can come in here. I can say, let me like this, give it the reply ID, say try it. It's going to tell me that reply was liked. I come back over here. I can see that there's 4 replies here, or 4 particular likes there. So using the API action actually interacts with the with the system there. So the other thing with the console is if you try to do an action that you're not allowed to do, like say I just pick some arbitrary message ID. Question does not exist. And then if I do one that's a little more reasonable, I can see that, the question doesn't exist. Basically, this is how all of the messages are going to come back. Now, if I decide to say, you know what, let me get the yard timeline for a yard I'm not in. It's going to come back with an error message. All the error messages are formatted in the same way. So it's going to give you a code, and it's going to give you the message. So right here, it's telling you that the user is not a member of that given yard. So when there's an error, on top of that, it's an HTTP 500. So this way, when you're checking for errors, you don't have to dig through the JSON response initially to say, is this an error? Is this not an error? You're easily able to actually come through and just verify that you're not getting a 500 level response. If you're getting a 500 level response, we know that there's a problem there. Now, what I'll do from here is we'll actually go over to the last slide. And what I'm going to do is we're actually going to open the floor for any questions. So if anybody has any questions, now feel free to go ahead and ask them, and then Chris will go ahead and field those for us.
All right, great. So we have a few questions that came in already. So we might as well let's get started. So the first question we have is, if I join ConnectYard using Facebook, will my students see my personal wall postings and photos?
So that's a really good question. So when you link up with Facebook, everything that happens between the users, these messages aren't actually posting on a user's wall in Facebook. You don't have to friend the user. Basically, you're allowing the user to access those messages inside of Facebook without having to sit there and become friends with anybody, or seeing their posts or seeing their pictures, because a lot of people don't want to have to worry about those kind of privacy concerns.
All right, great. So the next question we have here is, how does email work with ConnectYard?
How does email work with ConnectYard? So basically, when the users set up their accounts, they're going to be able to define kind of some basic settings in terms of how they want to receive messages. And then when they receive a message via email, they're going to basically be able to reply to that message, and that reply will actually go directly into that particular question. Or from a posting on a yard perspective, they can actually post to an individual yard. They actually get an ID for that yard that they can actually email to post to.
All right, great. So the next question we have here is, how long does it take to get ConnectYard up and running typically?
Well, that's a good question. I think that one might be more, Mike, for you to go ahead and touch on.
Sure. Yeah, it's using the straight ConnectYard interface, it's relatively quick. As far as the API, as Matt had shown you with the libraries and the assistance that you have, it's a relatively short period of time as far as doing the integration. So I don't know if that answers the question directly, but it's really a relatively short period of time.
All right, great. So we do have a few more questions. Do users have to go through the main ConnectYard website to create their accounts, set up social media channels for themselves, or can my application completely front-end the CYE functionality?
That's a really good question. Now, from a social media aspect, because the users actually have to interact with the social media site, you can't front-end it completely. The users have to link their accounts with Facebook, which means that they have to actually authorize access to Facebook, to Twitter, to LinkedIn. Those social media channels. Basically, it's the same as if you ever accessed any app from any app. Period. When you go to install the app, it actually asks you permissions for those users. And so for being able to access them, at the moment, you would need to actually be able to go to the site to allow the users to actually sync their accounts.
All right, great. So I do have another question. What is the learning curve from using ConnectYard in support of my classes?
One of the beauties of of ConnectYard and when you integrate it with the API, say it's the same type of thing, is users don't have to actually sign up and use every channel. They can start with email, and then as they get more comfortable, kind of graduate themselves up to using the greater sense of channels.
All right, perfect. So we have another question here. How do you traverse the timeline?
That's a really good question. So let me actually quickly show that. So if I come back over here, and we take a look at the some of the timeline functions, all of them are going to behave the same way. Basically, when we get the messages back, all the messages come with an ID. That's basically the unique ID in the ConnectYard system for that particular message. So when you're traversing the timeline, there's basically 3 parameters you can work with. There's a max ID, there's a min ID, and then there's the count. So what the max ID is actually going to do is it's going to actually return, as you can see right here, messages with an ID less than or equal to a given ID. So that way, when you're traversing the list chronologically, you're able to actually easily say, okay, well, I already got these messages. I want to get the next group of 10, or I want to get the group after this. So you can use that to actually pull those down. But the same thing actually works the other way, where when you want to get the new messages, you could use the min ID to be able to say, well, it's got to be bigger than this. So, if I were to actually say, the min ID is this value right here, it would only return to me this one post. But as new posts actually come in, those would actually get brought into here as well. I'll put this back up. Okay.
All right, great. So we have another question here. What areas is ConnectYard most used for in institutions? All right. So yeah, we'll ask Mike if you want to take that one.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, primarily, certainly it's used for course-level communications, as we had shown with quiz reminders and that type of thing. But we have a number of institutions that are really going strong in the student services arena. So for like financial aid reminders, first-year experience, for example, or as I'm thinking about it, it would be areas like diversity initiatives are very much leveraging ConnectYard, and then we have a number of institutions that are using ConnectYard as their emergency notification system. So hopefully that addresses it properly.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for covering that one. So we do have a few more questions. We typically like to keep it till 40 minutes. We value everybody's time and wanted to say thank you again for joining. So we have another question here. Will you be offering a way to make that social media connection in some sort of white labeled way so that my application could maintain its brand throughout the user experience?
That one actually kind of connects with the one that was asked before about going to ConnectYard.com. And while right now, in order to link those social media channels, you do have to actually go to ConnectYard.com, we are actually going to be adding in a way to, as you say, white label it. So to basically allow you to make a call that would allow the user to synchronize their account. So that is something that we are well aware of. So we will actually be implementing that into the API in the future.
All right, great. Is ConnectYard a hosted cloud service, or do we need to install on-premise?
Very good question. So you may have surmised the ConnectYard service is a hosted, cloud-hosted application. And basically from there, there's nothing for you to install. If you want to obviously consume the API, you have to do that work on your end. But actually being able to use it, no software you actually have to install from your side.
All right, great. And so the last question that we will cover today, for any questions that we did not get to, we will definitely follow up with you, everybody, to get those questions answered. So the final question we have is, who owns data collected through the postings?
Mike, do you want to actually go ahead and answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, the data is again resides on our servers. In some cases, there's some data on yours, but the data itself is your data. We don't do anything with that other than make it available for reporting purposes and the metrics that Anthony and Matt had covered. So it's your data is the short answer.
All right, thanks, Mike. And we have one more. Is there an admin function that limits from the top choices of a student has?
And it looks like there was an addendum. So basically, they were looking to see if they wanted, if there was a way to block channels, and there is. So basically, you can give access of the system to only allow users to receive messages on certain channels. So they basically wouldn't be able to process messages if they're coming from, say, Twitter. You know, you don't want to use Twitter. You can shut that down and allow people to use all those other channels.
All right, great. Well, we wanted to say thank you, everybody, for joining our presentation. For any questions that we did not get to, we will follow up with you after. Once again, we want to say thank you for your time and your efforts for joining our webinar, and everybody have a great day.